Yashodanandana Prajajanarandana Yamunati Ravanachari Yamunati Ravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavala Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Vrajanarandana Yashodanandana Vrajanarandana Yamona Tiravanatari Yamona Tiravanatari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Mudiraye Nasta Prayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatya Uttama Shloke Bhakti Bhavati Naistiki. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very mean defunct list, one should offer respectful obeisances to Auntie Goddess, Amen, unto Narayan Rishi, the supreme being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vasudev, the author. By regular attendance in classes of the Bhagavatam, and by rendering of service to the pure devotee, all that is also to the heart is almost completely destroyed in loving service. Got it? This path, spread on song, is established irrevocable fact. All right, so we're reading from Canto 2, Chapter 8. We're going to finish up the chapter, verses 26 till the end. Let me get the verses over there. So, The title is the chapter is titled "Questions by King Parikshit." So Parikshit Maharaj is asking all these questions, Shukadeva Goswami, and then yeah. All right, let's do the translation. Are you gonna go ahead and read?
O learned Brahmana, because of my drinking the nectar of the message of the infallible personality of Godhead, which is flowing down from the ocean of your speeches, I do not feel the need, I do not feel any sort of exhaustion due to my state.
Srila Goswami said, thus Sukadeva Goswami, being invited by Maharaj Parikshit to speak on topics of the Lord Sri Krishna with the devotees, was very much pleased.
He began to reply to the inquiries of Maharaj Parikshit by saying that the science of the personality of Godhead was spoken first by the Lord himself to Brahma when he was first born. Srimad Bhagavatam is the supplementary Vedic literature, and it is just in pursuance of the Vedas.
He also prepared himself to reply to all that King Parikshit had inquired from him. Maharaj Parikshit was the best in the dynasty of Pandus, and thus he was able to ask the right question from the right person.
Let's go to verse 26. Name sava parayanti Brahman anasanadami Devato chita piyusham Tadvakya abdi vinishritam Name sava parayanti Brahman anchanadami Vibato chita piyusham Tadvakyabdi vinishritam Name sava parayanti Brahmananashanadami Vibato chita piyusham Tadvakyabdi vinishritam. Name sava parayanti Brahman anashanadami Pibato chuta piyusham Tadvakya vinishitam.
Name sava parayanti
Brahman anashanadami Pibato chuta piyusham Tadvakya abdi vinishitam.
Name sava parayanti
Name sava parayanti Brahman anashanadami Pibato chuta piyusham Tadvakya abdi vinishitam. Say the words of it together. No, never. May. Fine. Let's do the translation together. O learned Brahmana, because of my drinking the nectar of the message of the infallible personality Godhead, which is flowing down from the ocean of your speeches, I do not feel inside or exhaustion due to my fast. I would like to read the purport.
The disciplic succession from Brahma, Narada, Vyasa, and Shukadeva Goswami is particularly different from others. The disciplic successions from other sages are simply a waste of time, being devoid of Achyuta Katha, or the message of the infallible Lord. The mental speculators can present their theories very nicely by reason and arguments, but such reasons and arguments are not infallible, for they are defeated by better mental speculators. Maharaj Parikshit was not interested in the dry speculation of the flickering mind, but he was interested in the topics of the Lord, because factually he felt by hearing such a nectarian message from the mouth of Shukadeva Goswami, he was not feeling any exhaustion, even though he was fasting because of his imminent death. One can indulge in hearing the mental speculators, but such hearing cannot endure for any length of time. One will be exhausted very soon from hearing such hackneyed ways of thinking, and no one in the world can be satisfied simply by hearing such useless speculations. The message of the Lord, especially from a personality like Shukadeva Goswami, can never be tiring, even though one may be exhausted from other causes. In some editions of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the text of the last line of this verse reads, Anyatra Kupita Dvijat, which means that the king may be overwhelmed by the thought of his imminent death by snakebite. The snake is also twice born, and his anger is compared to the cursing Brahmana boy who was without good intelligence. Maharaj Parikshit was not at all afraid of death, for he was fully encouraged by the message of the Lord. One who is fully absorbed in Achyuta Katha can never be afraid of anything in this world.
So yeah, the first line, well, I guess the second line. The second line, the purport Prabhupada says, the disciplic succession from other sages are simply a waste of time, being devoid of Achyuta Katha, or a message of the infallible Lord, and specifically, of course, about Krishna. So, one might read that line and be like, oh, everything else out there is bogus, it's useless, and nobody else knows anything. And Krishna is the, what's the verse in the Bible? the only way, the light, the way, One can get really fanatic after perhaps reading that verse. And what? Yeah, truth, way, the light, that's it, Nobody else knows anything else. Only our disciplic succession knows the truth, and everybody else is, as Prabhupada says, yeah, it's a waste of time. So one can read that and, one can think like that. What Prabhupada's point is actually interestingly, one point, I don't know if somebody brought up the story of the Joan of Arc, and, she was, I don't really, does anyone remember her story? She fought a war, right, for religious principles. Does anyone remember, right? That was basically the gist of it. And yeah, somebody mentioned that, and Prabhupada said, Srimad Bhagavatam. And they were like, what? Srimad Bhagavatam? I was like, it's not in the Bhagavatam. And but his point was that, no, if there's somebody who is glorifying Krishna or God, that is Srimad Bhagavatam, literally what Bhagavatam means, actually, glorification of Krishna. So it doesn't, in a sense, even people from different traditions, and that's why the Bhagavatam, the second or the third verse of the first chapter of the Bhagavatam, it says Dharma, the Dharma Parijata Kaitava, that all these Kaitava dharmas, these false religions, are kicked out. And what is false religion? Anyone want to share? Anyone come across false religions or the idea? What is false religion? Just finishing it.
Like somebody's mental concoction based on
Yeah.
speculation.
Yeah. That.
Or imagination.
Yeah.
Like Scientology. I'm just going to really quick. I want to say something.
Oh, sure, yeah, Mike.
Can I see this mic here?
Mike, go there.
This is just.
This needs to be heard all over the world.
This needs to be heard all over the world because
I'm definitely not trying to say anything about other bona fide religions, but
Sure.
Scientology is a perfect example because L. Ron Hubbard, who was their founder, was in the Guinness Book of World Records for the most science fiction novels written in 1 year. It was like 1,000 plus. He was like this master of like, you know, fictional story tales, and he fabricated an entire theology just from his imagination, you know, but there was nothing backed behind it or whatever, like there is Srila Prabhupada saying in this disciplic succession.
A succession of teachers. Do you have thoughts on false religion?
I think is what it generally is, what it means in this context is for material religiosity, economic development, in a sense, right?
Yeah, exactly. Adi Shankar? Adi, give it the mic. Gopal Prabhu, can you give the mic to Adi?
Like Maharaj, he talks in his class about different religions and different gunas. So traditions and mode of passion will be led by the principle of divide and conquer. Some religions will justify certain violence. And Tamaguna definitely justifies the violence. They will just say, well, you know, you can eat, you know, everything, just go for it. And Satvaguna sometimes they're like, well, just don't eat the frogs, some stuff like that, you know. So and the proper religion will teach one source of everything.
One source of everything.
One source of everything. And I think it was the principle with one source of everything.
And so the Bhagavatam, as Gopal Prabhu and Adi Prabhu and finishing up pointed out, it kind of rejects religion that is not based on real spirituality. And so initially when Vyasadeva was the author of the Vedas, the Bhagavatam, everything that's out there in the Vedic context, he compiled it. And so initially when he wrote a lot of stuff, you know, he had written the 4 Vedas, he wrote the Mahabharata, he wrote other histories as well. And he was depressed actually. And, you know, normally when there's an author who's written like huge texts, you know, they normally go out on a tour and show their books off and do the book signing and all that. But on the contrary, Vedavyas wrote all this and he was depressed. And so when he was depressed, his spiritual master Narada came. And Narada asked, oh great sage. Actually, he said, oh Prabhu, actually, that's the word in the Bhagavatam. He said, Prabhuji, why are you depressed? So his guru is asking, why are you depressed, Prabhu? And so Vedavyas said, I just don't feel fulfilled. You know, I wrote all this. And then Narada Muni said, yes, you wrote all this, but you failed to glorify the Supreme Personality Godhead, and you failed to talk about how one can come close to Krishna. So that's why you were depressed. And so then he instructed them, you know, you should directly write about that. And that's when Srimad Bhagavatam, the bulk of Bhagavatam came about. That's when Vedavyas started compiling these specific verses, these specific stories, this whole story between Parikshit Maharaj and Shukadeva Goswami. That's when he compiled it. So that's the essence of Srimad Bhagavatam. Because even in the Vedic tradition, there's all kinds of rituals, all kinds of stuff like, if you do this, even in the Bhagavatam refers to those verses, like, you know, it says, what does it say? If you worship, there's one verse somewhere like, you can worship Indra for great sex life, you can worship some other demigod for something else, you can worship someone for money, this and that. So all that's like in the Bhagavatam, not in the Bhagavatam, in the Vedic text. But the point is, that's really cheating religion. Bhagavatam says all those things are cheating religion because they really cheat you of the highest thing that one can get in the human form of life, and that's, you know, love of God. And of course, you know, and the thing is, at the same time, there's people of different interests and different caliber, and, you know, they want something in a particular life. So that's why the Vedas are there. So, well, if you want it, if you really want this, okay, here's the way to do it. Here's a nice way to do it. And so that's how the Vedas cover all bases. But the Srimad Bhagavatam is the next, like the penultimate, like it's Vedanta. Anta means the end, and Vedanta. So the end of the Vedas, the conclusion of the Vedas is the Srimad Bhagavatam. And you know, I was like, oh, let's see. Um, sorry. And then and yeah, Krishna is the no, he says in the Gita, he's the Vedanta Krit. He's the knower of the Vedas, and he himself the conclusion of the Vedas. So the conclusion of the Vedas is that one should worship, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. And and as Adi Shankar was saying, like traditions that are in good, more to goodness, they realize that there's only one God. There's a funny story of Radhanath Maharaj. He was preaching at some university up, I think in Ohio or somewhere. And there used to be, so he was preaching at the university, and there was another Christian preacher, kind of preaching nearby. And Radhanath Maharaj just had one or two students talking and listening to him, and then but the Christian preacher was like, Jesus Christ, it's all dramatic. So he had a bunch of students around him and was listening to him, and they were just some of them probably just there just to see the show. And then and he was preaching real hard. And so one of the students said, "What about that monk over there, the Hare Krishna monk?" And the preacher goes, "Oh, he's going to hell, and I'm going to tell him right now." so Maharaj is like talking to like one or two students, right? And all of a sudden, he sees this Christian preacher walking towards him with this horde of students, and he's like, "Okay, what's happening?" So then he comes, and then he's talking to Maharaj, and then this huge group of students around them, and then the preacher starts preaching to him like, Jesus is the only way, and so forth. And then he said, "Who do you worship, Jesus or somebody else?" And he said, "Well, I worship Krishna." And he's like, "Krishna, it's a fake god," and so forth. And then was that false god? Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, false god. And so Maharaj asked, well, he said, "So who do you worship?" Well, like, we worship Jesus, we worship God. I said, "Okay." So he said, "Well, so does your God, is he all beautiful? Is it the most beautiful person?" He said, "Yes." And he asked, does he have the most opulence? Yes. Does he have the most strength? Yes. Most wealth? Yes. What am I missing? There's two more. Did anyone remember? Strength? Which one? Was that? Yeah. Is he the most renowned? Yeah. Yes. And what's one more thing? There's 6 qualities of the personality Godhead. Strength, wealth, intelligence, fame. Yeah, is he the most famous? Yeah. So he's the most famous? Yes, and of course he's most famous, right? And so he said, so Maharaj said, in our tradition, if woman has all these qualities, then and then he asked him, like, so is your God, does he attract everybody? He said, yes, of course our God attracts everybody. So he said, well, in our tradition, that literally is the literal meaning of us. All attractive person is Krishna. So Maharaj goes, "So you worship Krishna?" And it's like, "No, I don't worship Krishna." Because that's what literally means, akarshana. Akarshana means to attract. And so that's where, there's the same root as Krishna and akarshana. So Krishna, one who attracts every living being. And that has to be God, I mean, how else one can be God if they don't attract everyone? And the interesting thing is, God attracts everyone in different ways. In the Bhagavatam, Bhishmadev, for example. So Bhishmadev was Arjuna's grandfather, and he was a great warrior. He loved to fight. Actually, it took a while. Kings are normally very passionate, and so they would have, back then, like way back then, they'd have a lot of wives, a lot of kids, and they'd fight and all that. And that's why they have TV shows like Game of Thrones, because back then there was nothing else to do except fight and win kingdoms and all that. So that was their entertainment. They needed to get that passion out. And so Bhishma, when he took the vow, for different reasons, he had to take a vow to never marry and have kids. So the demigods were shocked to hear it in the heavenly planets, and the sky opened up, and they all yelled out, "Bhishma," which means a terrible vow. Terrible vow, don't do it. But he did it. And so he was a celibate, but he was a kshatriya, he was a warrior, and he fought many battles, very valiant. So his relationship with Krishna was in that mood. And in the battlefield of Kurukshetra, he would shoot arrows at Krishna, and many of them would hit Krishna, and Krishna would start bleeding. But for Krishna, it was just like a shower of flowers, and he would accept it. And Bhishma knew that, so he had that relationship. My point being, Krishna is all attracted to everybody, and everyone gets attracted in different ways. And so Bhishma, they have that very, that chivalrous relationship with Krishna, and chivalry, that was his taste, that was his rasa, his relationship. And of course, in Vrindavan, it's much sweeter. There's the mood of parenthood. His parents, Yashoda and Nanda and the cowherd man and other cowherd women, they love him. They love him like their own little kid. They love him more than their own kids, actually. And so they just have so much attraction for him. And so then, of course, this parenthood, there's, of course, romance where, Krishna has other gopis who are just attracted to him. He's just so beautiful. They're attracted to him. And they're like, we want to marry him, So the gopis are there, the parents are there, and his friends are there, the sakas. They play around, that's and they play around with him, they wrestle with him, and then even then they play games, and then when he loses, they're like, you lost, you gotta carry us on your back, They're friends, they see him as equal. And there was a pastime where Krishna was telling him, oh, I was the supreme person, Ram, in the previous lives, and his friends were like, forget about it, you lost the game, you gotta carry us on your back, So they had that relationship. And then and then of course the servitude, there's that mood. It's perhaps not so much directly in Vrindavan, but of course there's other devotees who are just servants of Krishna. They have that mood of servitude. What are some devotees? I think Akrura was in that mood of servitude, right? Anyone else remember? Any other devotees who had that mood of servitude? In any case, but of course Krishna's own chariot driver, Daruka, he had that mood of servitude. And then of course there's this Shanta or neutral, where there's the rock and other things that just have this somewhat passive relationship with Krishna, but they're also attracted to Krishna. So there's different ways and forms people are attracted to Krishna, and that's the thing. Krishna is not just so. Yeah, again, God also cannot just be so narrow-minded that you can only worship me just in this one way, and if you don't, then here's the lake of fire. No, people are attracted in different ways, and Krishna has not only the capacity, of course, because he's God, but also he loves it. He loves that different people love him in different ways. He wants different relationships. In the Bhagavatam, you see in Vrindavan, the residents of Vrindavan, they love him. And Mother Yashoda, his mother, sometimes she realizes, oh, my son is God. Like, for example, when she looked in his mouth and she saw the entire universe, and she was like, oh my God. And then she saw the entire universe, and she looked deep, and she kept looking at the earth, and then she saw herself looking in his mouth, while she's looking in his mouth. So she saw that. She's like, oh my God, this is the Supreme Personality, got it. And then the next second she forgot about it, because Krishna doesn't want her to remember. And also he that relationship of having that intimate relationship with Krishna as her son, that is just so sweet. She just naturally just forgets, she just forgets that he's the Supreme Person. There was another time when the cowherd men, they went to his father, Nanda Maharaj, and they said, your son does all these different amazing things. Like, he lifted a mountain, and then he did all these different things. He killed this demon. He killed Putana, this huge demon, when he was just a baby, and all these different things. Who is he? Maybe he's a demigod. Maybe he's demigod. Maybe he's Vishnu himself. Maybe the Supreme Personality got it. And they were like, yeah, maybe he is. And then they go, oh yeah, and then he did this and he did this. Oh, Krishna is so sweet. We love Krishna. Krishna's our little boy. So it's like all of a sudden, they came to the conclusion he's Supreme Person, he's God. But then they kept talking about how sweet he is, and then they forgot about it. Even when I remember when I was reading the verses, like, hey, wait a minute, they lost their train of thought. And they do lose their train of thought because they love Krishna, and Krishna wants that sweet relationship. All right, so going back to the there are traditions where love of Godhead, actually Prabhupada said that too, any religion that propagates love of Godhead is a bona fide religion. And any religion that really educates people how one can come closer to God, come closer to loving God, it's a bona fide religion, And I think Prabhupada gives that example of the elephant. There's like 5 people, they're blindfolded, and they're looking at well, they're not looking, but they're feeling the elephant. They're feeling the elephant, and then one guy, he grabs the trunk, and he says, "Oh, it's a tree. It's a big trunk, or it's a tree." And someone grabs the tail, and they're like, "Oh, it's just rope." and somebody grabs something else, they come to a different conclusion. But they're only looking at one certain aspect of the elephant, so they can't figure out it's an elephant. The same thing in religion also. When you look at only one aspect of God, you think God is limited, and you think that's it, But when you actually are, that's the thing. That's why we have these scriptures. That's why we have these scriptures written by, and that's why we actually have the disciplic succession, because the succession comes from Vyasadeva, who wrote all these texts. He's the literary incarnation of Krishna, and all these various spiritual masters who had these deep realizations about Krishna. And so through that, one can see, okay, well, this is what it means, for someone to be the Supreme Personality God. He has these 6 opulences. He has these many relationships. Krishna is multifaceted. Is that the word, faceted? Faceted? Anyways, there's a lot of variegatedness, to him. He's not cut and dry God, And so, and again, because the Supreme Person can't just be cut and dry. It wouldn't make any sense. So Krishna has all these features, and people worship in different ways. And so that's why there's also 4 disciplic successions in the Vaishnavas also. And Prabhupada's point about any disciplic succession that is devoid of talking about Krishna, yes, that is a waste of time. If you go to a church where they don't really glorify God, they just talk about, I don't know what they would talk about at a church. But actually, speaking in Scientology, there was this one, I think she was a relative of a devotee of Hare Krishna, and these Scientologists, they would come to her all the time, and they would sell her these courses and books. They're like, next level, you gotta go to the next level, and to go to the next level, you gotta take these courses. You take this. Like, okay. So, and then finally, they came to her one day, and she was like, "Here, come, why don't you come inside?" She said, "Sure." And she was like, "Here, let's take a look at this room." So she opens this room, and this room is entirely full of back then there was DVD packs and all that, and books and all that. And she was like, I don't know, I don't know if I can do any more than this. I got enough for a lifetime. So if the religion is just about, just whatever, selling stuff, or if they're just about collecting money, or they're just about, well, these days about politics. If it's just about that, then it is a waste of time actually, because the real purpose of religion is to worship God, to glorify God. And then, based on that, based on the principles of religion, there might be, a church might, be involved in other activities that pertain a little bit more to society and so forth. That's great. But the core focus has to be, that love of God. How do you increase how does one restore one's relationship with God? So that has to be the main thing. So that's Prabhupada's point. Not that we go out there and be like, well, you don't worship Krishna, you're a waste of time. But let's see. Any thoughts or comments so far? Yeah, Esther, you have a mic over there?
So this is speaking about disciplic successions from other sages are a waste of time. But what happens when we come across people who are from our same sampradaya, who are now in different branches of the tree?
Oh yeah.
I sometimes find that there is a resistance to, or outright we need to protect ourselves. Like there's this fear.
Huge fear.
I know some of the history of why that is. I'm just curious I want to know this from the elevated perspective. So
for
from
sure.
the perspective of perfection, how is it that we are supposed to interact with other Gaudiya Vaishnavas?
For sure. Even in our Sampradaya tradition, there's so many branches actually over time. So I mean, the general mood is, and Prabhupada's mood, he always is respectful to his godbrothers. So they're always respectful. It's always respectful to them. And I think, the only, because as historically, if somebody comes here and starts telling the devotees here, well, Prabhupada didn't really give everything that, let me tell you more. Let me give you more. All right, maybe not the best manners. So if somebody does that, sure, we could be like, maybe we need to talk about your conduct here. But in general, they're devotees of Krishna, so we respect them. And sometimes there's that saying. Actually, that was a town president of one of the Gaudiya temples. He told me, he said, "Yeah, good fences make good neighbors." I said, "Yeah, it's true. You know, you just have boundaries. You just have, you know." And at the same time, we set our boundary that, you know, somebody can't come and be at a temple as set up by Prabhupada and be like, "Hey, I didn't really know what he was talking about." You know, they can't do that. At the same time, we look at them; they're devotees, they're nice, and they're welcome, of course. And again, yeah, at the same time, if they say something like that, then it's like doesn't make sense actually. You know, Prabhupada set up. He came all the way here. You know, back then, the Guardian Mutt could care less about Prabhupada when he was trying to preach. And his own God brothers didn't really give him much support. He was trying, if you read his biography in the Lilamrita, he was trying his best to work with one of his God brothers to print magazines. I forget, maybe it was Sajjana Toshni, which was set up by his guru. And so, you know, he asked them for 2 sets of clothes so that he can go and preach. Yeah, because he said, you know, I don't really have good kurtas and dhotis, so like if you could kindly sponsor. And then his God said, "Oh no, it's all right. You know, what you have is fine." Okay. And then he asked for a few other things, and he got no support. So he just left basically. And then he kept preaching, and then finally he was able to get a ticket, you know, on the Jaladuta ship, right? And he came here. So he hardly had any support back then. And so, yeah, so he sacrificed so much to come here. So I think that's where that feeling comes that you're expressing, you know. Sometimes devotees feel like, no, Prabhupada, we love Prabhupada, and what the amount of sacrifice he did, and what he actually established. It actually kind of ties in with the verse, the 4 sampradayas, you know. So Lord Chaitanya, so yeah, when Lord Chaitanya came, he really, he put all the essence of the 4 Vaishnava sampradayas together. The philosophy of Lord Chaitanya really puts it together. And Bhaktisiddhanta noted that. And that's why when you go to Bhaktisiddhanta's Prabhupada's guru, so when you go to Prabhupada's guru in Mayapur, you see at his temple, he has the deities of the 4 acharyas. And he has the deity of Lord Chaitanya. And his point was that Lord Chaitanya is the summum bonum of all these 4 sampradayas, 4 Vaishnava traditions in India. And so, I lost my train of thought. But anyway, and then Prabhupada, of course, carried that, and he came here and spread that, you know. And so, yeah, if someone comes and says, hey, there's more that you need to know from, beyond Prabhupada, then it is disrespectful. So that's why, and it happens. So that's why there's that intense feeling of protection. But in general, yeah, they're Vaishnavas, and you know, depending on who they are, we can have certain boundaries, you know, less or more. It's kind of by case, really, based on the behavior.
Yeah, as far as Prabhupada not giving us everything, the very first canto, very first volume, very first verse, very first purport, very first chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very first book Prabhupada gave us, he talks about the rasa dance and spiritual sex psychology. Very first purport in the Bible. First book he gave us.
Now, I'm going to make a quick story happen in terms of how true religion sees one source of everything. There was a person who came to Krishna house last year, and he needed to buy a bed frame or something, some sort of appliance. He came with his son. And we got to talking, and he said his house has burned up. So he lost everything.
Oh.
So, and when I heard it, I said, "Oh, Jesus Christ." He said, he paused, he looked at me, he's like, "Are you allowed to say that?" And I said, "Why not? Like, we love Jesus, like he's great." He's like, I could see his eyes, like his whole reality started falling apart. Like, it's like, how is it possible you can love Jesus? So I got to talk and explain it. Hey, you know, the servant of God is like a dog. He will recognize his master no matter what clothes he's wearing.
Yeah.
So, and I said, that's not a division, it's actually unity. And I told him, my best friend outside of Krishna house, Charlie, right? He's a treasurer of the Baptist church. He comes here, we hang out, we have great philosophical discussions. So it's the person who really understands the tradition, they will see a lot more similarities.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. But yeah, that was a good example. When the dog sees the owner in different clothes, and he sees, but he still recognizes.
All right, I just have a follow-up question.
Sure.
This is something that's like really, I struggle with this part of ISKCON. So I struggle with this part of this, which is like, is there a point at which we forgive? Is there a point at which we like, or is this a waste of time? Like, this is one of my central questions. Like, is it a waste of time to try to forgive, make amends, and create unity amongst all of the lineages of Lord Chaitanya? Or yeah, because I don't know, I just feel like so many wars were like, something happened to my grandfather, and I'm gonna hold that grudge.
Forever.
We're gonna hold that grudge for the rest of eternity. When the truth is like like the central essence of Lord Chaitanya's movement is consciousness. Right? So I'm just curious if you can comment.
Yeah, I mean, Lord Chaitanya was super inclusive, that was like his whole thing. And because the priests at that time, they didn't want to really share the mantras and everything and allow people of lower caste by birth to the temple. So Lord Chaitanya was like, we're gonna take the deity of Krishna as a holy name out on the streets to everybody, right? So super inclusive. And even in our schools, we studied about Lord Chaitanya as a social reformer, actually. So he wasn't just, of course he's the incarnation of Krishna, but also, in that context, he and Bhaktivinoda Thakur, I remember reading his name, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is also a social reformer. But so we want to be inclusive. I think the only thing is like, we just want to be careful. That was the only thing. But it doesn't mean that we can't be inclusive. One of my friends, Nrsinga, who was mentioning, he was the town president of the Nar Mars temple. He's a good friend, but we knew our boundaries. We'd always be respectful, and he actually would give donations to Krishna House himself. And so it was nice. But at the same time, it doesn't, we have learned a lesson from the past. We keep it in mind. But it doesn't mean that, as you were saying, we can be inclusive. There's no harm in it. But just, one can be a little cautious, but one shouldn't just be totally, that kind of defeats the whole point of the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. It's like the whole point is you see Krishna in everybody. You see everyone as a devotee, or to speak of somebody in a somewhat slightly different tradition. So you're respectful to them and you're inclusive. Of course, unless, as I mentioned, but with that little thing that, if it disturbs, other devotees, or disturbs especially Krishna house, then then it's going to be a concern. But in general, I mean, as devotees, you want to be inclusive. That's the whole point. Those are my thoughts. Janishinga, and then Prue over here. Sorry, I forget your name, Prue. Arun, sorry. Janishinga, and then yourself.
Here, you can go ahead.
No, go. You can go.
No, go ahead.
Such humble devotees. Go ahead, Arun. You watch them stand up.
Hare Krishna. I always struggle with this Vaishnavas, what is really Vaishnava means, and Shivaya. So Vaishnavas means it's more like a Vishnu, praising Vishnu, praying to the Vishnu. But coming to Shaiva is like a Shiva, it's more like a Shiva. So when you said like a Vaishnavas, like Chaitanya Prabhu's formed the Vaishnavas like some pillars like that. So can you elaborate on that?
So your question is that so Vaishnavas worship Vishnu and Shaivas worship Shiva, right? Yes. And you said so Lord Chaitanya put the four Vaishnava Sampradayas together.
Yes.
And so your question is to elaborate on that, or why is it?
Yes,
Elaborate on that.
I just thought Vaishnavas is a Vishnu prayer. That's what I thought. So what are the interior of that means?
I see. I mean, the Lord Chaitanya put the four Vaishnava Sampradayas together, and the Shaivats are there to worship Shiva.
Yes.
And I mean, Vedavas, and again, like the Vedas are written in such a way so that everybody can progress in their spiritual life. And so there are texts, there are different texts. Actually, the Goswamis, I forget which one, Jiva Goswami or Sanatana Goswami, he speaks about it. And he says there's different Puranas, and based on the nature of people, they're there so that people can worship different, So those who are motivated in a certain way, they worship Shiva. And the devotees, the Vaishnavas, they're motivated, they really want to go back to God, they want to go to Vaikuntha. They worship Vishnu directly. And they want to have that loving relationship with Krishna and Vishnu. And so they worship Vishnu. And so ultimately the conclusion, even Lord Shiva actually, according to the Bhagavatam, he's the best of the Vaishnavas actually. He worships Vishnu, he worships Krishna, he has loving affection. And then there are those who worship Lord Shiva because they're really attracted by him. So there's all different groups. There's a lot of variegatedness, and the ultimate, the understanding of the Srimad Bhagavatam is that the absolute truth is described. It comes out as Brahman, as the impersonal feature, right? And as a super soul, and then as a supreme person. So that personhood is Krishna. Krishna has all these many features in full. So Krishna is there, he has all these 64 qualities, and then Vishnu has, I believe, 60. And then Shiva has, few more features less, and so forth. So in a sense, they're all, especially Shiva actually is a representation of the absolute truth, but not in full. So the Shaivas are attracted to him, and that's great, and they worship him. And so with Lord Chaitanya, though, in the Vaishnava tradition, there's 4 sampradayas. So he was able to really put them together and give us the conclusions of all the sampradayas together. Does that explain better?
Yes, that's it. Yeah, but I want to know what are the 4 sampradayas.
Oh, do you want to know 4? Sorry about that. The 4 sampradayas are the Sri Sampradaya, and of course, Brahma Madhva Gauriya Brahma Sampradaya comes from Lord Brahma. Sri Sampradaya comes from Sri, from Lakshmi and Lakshmi Narayan. And then there is the Rudra Sampradaya, which actually comes from Lord Shiva, and then they worship Krishna, Vishnu. And then of course, then there's the last one, then Varka, which I forget, Kumara Sampradaya. So that comes from the 4 Kumaras. Sorry about that. I didn't understand the question. So those are the 4 Sampradayas, the Vaishnava Sampradayas. Sure. All right, Janishinga, did you have a follow-up point from the other question?
With what you're saying, I got a lot to say. I'm trying to keep it brief, but I like even what he's asked me for you to elaborate on, because even in this purport, when Srila Prabhupada just kind of like dismisses, the information from the other disciplic successions, what I appreciate so much about, this knowledge is that he's not saying they're not true, or that they don't exist, but it's like acknowledging that they're there, but it seems like he always wants to redirect our focus.
Yeah.
So I just appreciate there's so many things that aren't dismissed, but Srila Prabhupada has a way of dismissing things that are actually bogus and validating things that are, but just redirecting. And I was thinking about that story you had said about the guy asking a Christian if he thinks God is all attractive. If that ever happens to anybody and you say, well, is God all attractive? And a Christian says yes, ask him, describe him to me. He's described at least 3 times in the Bible. And the first time is a burning bush.
Yeah. And
you can't really have a relationship with the burning bush. So it's impersonal, the first description of him, because he's not described during the creation story like Lord Brahma is. The next time he's described, I'll go through this really quick. The next time he's described is in Ezekiel. That's in the Old Testament. So this is not described by Jesus. This is described by one of the prophets in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
This is essentially the beginning of that chapter, the very first chapter of that book. Ezekiel is fasting and praying by a river in isolation, and the Lord appears on a throne with a golden crown and some associates similarly described to demigods, and he gives him pranams. They call him prostrate. He prostrated himself at the river because he was praying for a vision of the Lord. And then he gives him some type of instruction. And besides that, then in the New Testament, he's described in Revelations as very similar to Lord Brahma type appearance.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to share that. So if regarding the unity in the Sampradayas, for those of you who have not been to the Holy Names Festival in the end of November on Thanksgiving weekend, I think so far in my experience, that's the nicest example of all of the diverse branches of the Hare Krishnas unified together under very specifically the holy name itself. That is the pivot, like you were saying, that unifies all of us, that ultimately we don't really disagree on. And yeah, it was presented by Lord Chaitanya. So the real unity is at times when we can come together under the holy name and under the shelter of Lord Chaitanya, then there is unity. But I've also experienced in any type of different practices, not even just yoga practices, but martial arts practices. It's a tree. It's a family tree.
Right.
And there's going to be different schools of thoughts from different teachers at different schools.
I didn't catch the martial arts part.
Well, they're very similar. They have.
Oh, you're saying they also have similar.
Yeah, yoga and martial arts are very similar with cyclic succession, with transcendental knowledge, and they have also, a school and students and a practice, and they also can branch off and say, well, I learned from this teacher, but there's certain things I don't agree with. I'm going to go make my own school and start this different kind of. But ultimately, they're all for the same purpose. Yoga is for unity, and martial arts is for self-defense.
Yeah, that's all these sampradayas are there ultimately to worship Krishna and glorify Him, and especially those set up by Lord Chaitanya are there with the holy names, glorify Krishna with the holy names. Yeah, that was. I had more points, but we're out of time. So, all right. Any Grantha Bhagavatam ki? I was like only my first point. I actually had so many other points to share. Yeah. They'll hear everything.
Fortunate persons develop faith in
The deity of Sri Govinda, the same personality of Godhead, the transcendental Krishna Nam, and the Vaishnavas. Bhagavad Mahaprasadam ki jai. This is the
yeah. But like it was fun reading and you guys one question whole year. But really? I don't know what happens to me on sometimes. Yeah.
extent.
Well, so when you extend